Good afternoon and welcome to the fifth session today, the Animal Rights Summit, are part of the VegFest UK online December 12th, 13th, 2020 series. You can find all the talks, presentations, live streams on the vegfest.co.uk website. They are all there, archived under the live streams in December. And you can see them all there for free. You're welcome to share them. And indeed, today we'll be talking in this session. Before I do even proceed further, you'd be very welcome if you're listening to ask any questions in the comments section. If we don't get to them before during the talk, they will be there to be answered later. So the title of this talk is based around animal rights and human health. It's a challenging topic. Part of the aim here is really just to provide a supportive environment, a supportive platform for people as a resource to get some balanced input and some measured conversation. A pointer perhaps to some really valuable resources for people to, look further. And to touch on a few areas so that we can consider a few factors in this really vast and detailed and expert arena of animal rights and human health. To enable us to do that today, we had to welcome our two very special guests today. We're very grateful for both Leila Dehghan and Stephen Walsh for joining us today. Leila, good afternoon. Stephen, thanks for joining us. And welcome to this session. So, Leila, please do introduce yourself. A little bit about yourself and your expertise and interests, perhaps.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here because actually, I'm vegan for animals, so animal rights are very important and close to my heart. But I used to be a doctor, so I worked as a doctor for a long time in the UK, and now I'm a nutritionist. So again, human health is something I'm really interested in. So and combining these two is, it's really my passion. How can we actually, look after, at both of these aspects and make the most of it? So I'm really glad to be here. So as I said, yes, I used to be a doctor, but I had to give up for health reasons, and then I studied nutrition. So I'm a plant-based nutritionist, and I'm an advisory board of the Plant-Based Health Professionals UK. I'm also the education lead at Plant-Based Health Professionals UK. So yes, and I'm also a personal trainer, so I actually like to have a holistic approach when it comes to health. And as I mentioned, I'm vegan for animals, so I'm active. I'm kind of an animal. I rehome dogs. Let's put it that way. So that is what I do on the side. So yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. That really sort of fits the whole perspective there, Leila. You've really sort of summed up where we are trying to do is address that. Your background and expertise, your medical background as a doctor, and then as a nutritionist, as a plant-based nutritionist, and holistic health. But also a vegan, for the animals. So that's a sort of really good background of expertise, really, because it's a number of different areas. Stephen.
Well, I became vegan again for the animals in 1993. My background isn't medical; it's in research, and I got very involved in researching vegan nutrition through the experience of encountering really some quite mixed up ideas among the vegan community. I'm thinking, well, there should be better information on this, better evidence on which to present this. And I got involved in researching that. I also got involved more with the Vegan Society as a key channel for getting good information out. And I wrote Plant-Based Nutrition and Health, which they published in 2003, and I developed the Veg1 supplement for them. I've been a trustee of the Vegan Society for over 14 years with a break in the middle. So I bring the research perspective on vegan nutrition, the general vegan for the animals ethical perspective, and a lot of experience of how the vegan society has approached things over the years. Directly, my experience often is the past 2 decades, but I've also looked back into some of the older material they produced, which is very interesting. And I'll touch on a little bit of that later.
Fantastic, Stephen. Again, just absolutely credentials for this particular specialist talk, because again, you've got that research background, which is really essential these days, but also a vegan for the animals background, quite long term, which is interesting when we come into perhaps long-term plant-based health, which we will be featuring a little bit on. And of course, really interesting, I find this really interesting, is your absolute inside knowledge of the vegan society and the evolution of these ideas over time, because you've had access and the interest to look at all of this. So on that note too, Stephen, I do just want to say, I know you've done some extremely dedicated service to the vegan society over the years. Currently, the vegan society is looking probably better than it's ever looked I can ever remember. And a lot of that is down to the hard work of a few key individuals. There's a team there that works really hard to achieve that. And Leila, much like the plant-based health professionals, which you are now working for, and won the award yesterday, voted for the best vegan initiative.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Stephen, you know, as I said, the vegan side, that was a personal thanks, but I know on behalf of also a lot of other people who know that you put in a lot of service there, and very much a part of the steadying of the vegan society and a clarification and a taking forward. You know, there's always a backroom team, as it were, and I know you've been a big part of that. So thanks. So the first area I'm going to touch on is, or ask you about, is really about the supplements. I mean, I think we're just for a basis for listeners, we're approaching this from the basis, the understanding that a plant-based, whole food, unprocessed diet with adequate supplements and adequate exercise are a given. That's the basis from which we're approaching this. We're looking at a perspective that takes that factor into account, I suppose, if you like. So on that note, there's been quite a lot of talk about supplements for two reasons. One, protecting people from getting illness, specifically at the moment, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And also from another recent perspective in the news about long-term deficiencies and increase in certain things, perhaps bone fractures or something that's been in the news recently. So Leila, I know you've described yourself as a holistic health, which is sort of where I'm at too, but with a medical background. So what's your intake, input at the moment on that area specifically?
Well, I think when it comes to supplements, we know that vegans need certain supplements. And the problem is a lot of vegans believe that if they take supplements, that makes a vegan diet unnatural. So they really it is almost as if they want to prove that, I can get everything from food. So, that is just to show that, a vegan diet is natural and it is healthy. But we need to bear in mind that, our lifestyle, our modern lifestyle, and this is not something which has been happening the last few years. It has been going on for a long time. The soil is depleted of minerals. So a lot of foods are actually fortified, and that goes for non-vegans as well. So a lot of nutrients we get actually from supplements. Either we do that directly by taking a supplement ourselves, or the supplements are given to the animals, and that's why we find them in the animal products. So I think it's really important for us vegans to realize that yes, we do need to take some supplements, and there is nothing wrong with that. And obviously the first one is B12. We all need to take that. And I think the problem is a lot of, again, vegans try to get it from fortified foods, and there's nothing wrong with that. I do that myself. But if we do that, we really need to be careful. We really need to watch our diet. What I do, for example, And I have another friend who is actually a martial artist, and he doesn't take a vitamin B12 supplement, but he drinks like kind of, a liter of soy milk, fortified soy milk every day. And again, another thing is we need to check our blood levels every year. And that is something I see a lot of vegans not doing. I don't know if it is just because they are not aware of it. And, we live in the UK, it is actually free. They just need to go to the GP, and the GP gives them a prescription. They can just take the blood form and have it done. So I'm not talking about, expensive blood tests which are not available on the NHS. So it is free blood tests. Just tell your GP you are vegan and you get them. And the same goes with supplements. I'm not talking about like kind of expensive supplements. B12 is quite cheap, just get it. And to be honest, as I said, although I take, from fortified foods myself, I always recommend that people take supplements. It is very easy, just once weekly, and that is it. So B12 is really non-negotiable. Don't even kind of go there, just take it. And of course, vitamin D, and which has been in the news quite a lot recently because of the association with COVID-19. And what I find is that kind of, we talk about vitamin D as if it is a new nutrient. It is not. NHS has always recommended that everybody in the UK, and again, it has nothing to do with the diet we are having. Everybody needs to take a supplement in the winter months, so from October up to kind of March, April. So again, the recommendation has been there, but I think the problem is a lot of people are not aware of it. I work in the community, and that was last year before the pandemic. And I work with people like who are non-vegans, and they have health issues, they are elderly, and none of them was on vitamin D. They didn't even know that they needed to have the supplements. And I'm talking about last winter. So I think there is really lack of education. The public is not aware of these nutrients, and then something happens, and suddenly the news, talks about it, and then everybody's like, oh, we need to take that. No, we always needed to take that. And again, I want to just, repeat, it goes for vegans and non-vegans. Winter months, we all need to take a supplement. Now, when it comes to vitamin D, it is actually difficult to get it from food anyway. It is mostly fortified, and even non-vegans struggle with it. And if there isn't enough sun exposure, again, we need a supplement. So some may actually need a supplement throughout the year. And we know that, people like, myself who have a bit darker skin, and, the Black community, Asian community, they need a longer exposure to sun. And so that's why, again, and it also means that, it doesn't mean long sleeves, shirts. So we need to actually, our skin needs to be exposed to the sun. So if that is not happening, then take a supplement. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. So these two supplements are really kind of important. We need to think about it. I want to mention something about the association with the COVID-19. We know that, those who have vitamin D deficiency, they are like, there was actually a study published in September in the Journal of American Medical Association. And people who have vitamin D deficiency, they have a double, higher risk of actually getting COVID-19. And then there was another study in October published recently, which said that actually those who had, again, vitamin D deficiency, they actually had, more severe cases of COVID-19 infection, and they needed hospitalization. So there is an association. We don't understand it completely, but obviously we know that we need vitamin D for, better immune system, but we don't really understand what the association is, between COVID-19 and vitamin D. But yes, as I said, we need it, and we have always needed it. So it's not a new thing. And so I think it just highlights the importance of actually taking care of our nutrition. So I think, these two are really important, and they have just made headlines recently because of, COVID-19, and B12 obviously because, as vegans who don't take supplements, they have lower levels. So yes. Do you want me to go on about the rest of the?
That's good, because that's two things there that I took out of that particularly is that the vitamin D is a deficiency, and if you get a lung illness or COVID, this is going to be instant. You're going to know this, and if you have good vitamin D levels, you've been supplementing and listening to people like Stephen Walsh and not ignoring your supplements like some of us do. then that's going to be in the short term. May well be a short-term benefit. I think one of the issues is that with B12, it's a long term, and you don't notice. So if people are thinking, I don't really, either can't be bothered, or lazy, or just useless, like I've been, or just not having the access to the B12, or the issue of this is it's long term, and so you don't notice straight away. So I think that's part of the problem. So Stephen, I know you are, as you said, the person who developed the Veg1 Vegan Society supplement. Presumably that's what you would recommend people to take, I would guess.
It was developed to be one option. People can take different approaches. One thing about Veg1 is it doesn't try to cover all vitamins, because we found that a lot of vegans didn't want to be taking things that there was no justification for. So it was a very targeted supplement. And right at the top of the list is, of course, vitamin B12. So you have a lot more than the RDA in it. So to absorb a sufficient amount, even if you're taking the supplement once a day. A lot of people think they can take an ordinary supplement occasionally, and that should be enough. And for vitamin B12, that's certainly not the case. You really need to be taking the vitamin B12 ideally once a day, unless you're going to take mega doses. To get a natural dose, you take it at least once a day. And if you want to be really careful, you can actually, say with Veg1, break it in half, take half in the morning, half later. And that actually boosts the B12 absorption considerably. You absorb almost as much from half a tablet as from a whole tablet. But the important thing is to get the B12 from somewhere and get it in a sufficient quantity and frequency. And a lot of people underestimate that. And in the early days of the Vegan Society, some vegans died because of B12. That was recorded in interviews with Donald Watson. But the Vegan Society very strongly embraced the science at the time. And rather than resisting the idea that they needed vitamin B12, they said, this is great, this deals with the gap, this enables us to be healthy, compassionate vegans, reliably. And they really did embrace it and promote it, and also develop the first plant milks to start making the fortified route available to people. Apparently, some of the early plant milks were pretty awful. I recall one person who'd been vegan for decades saying they used to hold their nose and drink it. But we've got a lot of plant milks now, and as you know, lots of people beyond even vegans taking them. And almost all the plant milks now are fortified, apart from the organic ones, where organic regulations prevent it. So if you are keen on organic, then the fortified route really doesn't work. And as Leila said, if you're going to rely on fortified foods, you need to bear in mind that you're aiming to get at least about 3 micrograms across a day. And that isn't quite a litre of soy milk. A lot of soy milks, they have 0.4 micrograms per 100 ml. So you're looking at 750 ml, 3/4 of a litre to get the 3 micrograms. So I think for a lot of people, using a supplement is the simpler way. If you want to use organic food for other reasons, it becomes particularly important to use the supplement because you won't be getting the fortified B12. And I agree as well, vitamin D is another one, and that's also in Veg1. And we, about 5 years ago, increased the amount in Veg1 and switched over to using D3. For a long time, vitamin D3 was not vegan. It was derived from lanolin or from animals in other ways. But there's now D3 from a number of companies, generally derived from lichen, in the case of the D3 that the Vegan Society uses now in Veg1. And the D3 is a bit better retained in the body. So we use that, and we use a relatively high amount. We use actually double what the government recently went over to recommending. We use 20 micrograms rather than 10. But I'm not plugging just Veg1. Veg1 was designed to be a good complement to a vegan diet, but there are lots of other products available. Leila, I think, covered the need for B12 and vitamin D. After them, I would say I would mention trace minerals, iodine, selenium. And the reason for that is plants don't require selenium and iodine. A plant will happily grow without any. So how much is in a plant food depends on where it's grown. And the soil in Britain really isn't terribly good. You used to get Derbyshire neck due to iodine deficiency when people were eating much more a local diet. Now that people are eating foods from across the world, you tend to pick up a bit more iodine and selenium than you would otherwise. But having it in a supplement provides a good safety net for those two important nutrients. And a lot of GPs just aren't aware. They're told that iodine is not an issue in the UK. And while they might think of vitamin B12 if a vegan turns up, they probably won't think of iodine. And they're more likely to put you on thyroxine than they are to ask you where you get your iodine if your thyroid function's looking a bit dodgy.
So the advice is do the supplements, don't be shy. There's a lot of value in supplements. You don't have to have expensive supplements, but you do have to have regular supplements. Part of the reason is because on a plant-based diet, you may be lacking one or two, like B12, D3, but also because of conversion rates and because of the natural depletion in the soil of nutrients that are readily available and assimilable in our plant-based diets. So certainly, if you're taking lots supplements, can I just ask you very briefly before we move on, because I do want to go on to the ethics of some of the animal ethics, animal rights aspects of this conversation. But very briefly, is it are there studies that point to too much? Can you take too much D3 or too much B12 or too much EPA, DHA? Leila? Stephen? Sorry?
Okay, I don't know any studies. I mean, to be honest, with the B12, I haven't come across any side effects. I mean, I had actually one vegan client who had higher levels, and the reason was because she was having a lot of fortified foods, plus taking her supplement every single day without fail, which you don't really usually see in vegans. So she had a bit of, her levels were high. I just told her to, not take her supplement for a few days, and it came down very easily. So, but there aren't any kind of adverse health effects, not that I'm aware of, So, I mean, it also depends obviously on the level. And with D3, again, the same. The thing is, it's the rate of the conversion. For example, vitamin D, recently there was a very interesting study showing that, we actually measure the serum level of D3. So that is how much the body has stored vitamin D. That is the inactive form. But what actually makes a difference is the active form. So the conversion of the inactive to the active form. And the study showed actually that there is an association between the conversion, the level of the active form, and healthy gut microbiome. So there is a lot more going on than we are aware of. And I just think, I don't like to take a reductionist kind of approach, saying, this nutrient, these numbers. We need to, again, take a holistic approach. And even when it comes to nutrition, look at all the nutrients and how they interact with each other. So, yeah.
Okay. And Stephen, what were you going to just say to that about too much? Too much, is that especially with D3, actually, because D3 are very high levels of D3, for instance.
D3 can be toxic, but the sort of supplements that are generally sold are well within the safe range. So, for example, Veg1 uses 20 micrograms of D3. You're certainly safe in children, probably up to 50, in adults, up to 100. The real problems evidence problems seems to come above about 250 micrograms a day. So with ordinary supplements, you really shouldn't have a problem. I don't know if anyone who that you could, if you bought a liquid supplement of some sort and took far more than the daily recommended amount, you probably could do yourself some harm. But if you use just ordinary supplements, you take the amount that's recommended for a day, I wouldn't expect you to get into the slightest problem with D3. With B12, there's really, as Leila said, no clear evidence of toxicity. I think there's a little bit of a question mark if you're using pharmaceutical doses, thousands of micrograms, whether that has an impact on the microbiota. Because it's not a natural thing. For most of it won't get absorbed, but it will go down into the gut. I think while there's no clear evidence of a problem, I would put a slight question mark on that, which is one reason why I would generally recommend people get their B12 in moderate amounts frequently, at least once a day, rather than relying on mega doses once a week or less. I don't know if Leila has any opinion on that.
Yes, and I think that for a lot of nutrients, actually, it is better, like iodine, for example. It is much better to get it frequently over the week rather than having one large dose once a week. And most supplements you buy, actually, even when they are over the counter, unless you take more than what is recommended, there is no way of actually overdosing. So again, you just need to stick to read what it says on the label and stick to that. Then yes. And again, as Stephen said, I totally agree. It's better to take it small doses throughout the week rather than just one large dose. And it goes for a lot of nutrients. Yes.
Yeah, I think one nutrient where there's a bit of a question mark is retinol, which is preformed vitamin A. And there was some evidence that even RDA recommended type levels of retinol might have an adverse impact on bone health. So I think I'd be particularly cautious in that. If you get your vitamin A in a supplement as beta-carotene, your body then has to convert it, and that doesn't seem to have the same risk associated with it. But retinol is the only one I can think of that at typical levels in supplements would have a bit of a question mark on it.
Okay, well, thanks for that. That's really interesting. And there is, I know both the Vegan Society and the plant-based health professionals have a really good set of resources. So for, a slight bit of a cliche these days about doing your research, but if you do want to do your own research, what's interesting is that you can go to really well-researched research. And I know that the sources, both of the plant-based health professionals and the Vegan Society, really good resources. So I would recommend people, it's an area that I know is growing and there's a lot of information about. There's people out there saying this, that, and the other, and pointing to this, that, and the other to back up this, that, and the other. And it's an era where we do want good, reliable resources, good open discourse. And generally speaking, I think we know this, the middle ground there is, you pay attention to these issues, and the solutions are not that hard to find generally. And a middle ground, listening with an inquisitive approach, but also not a closed mind, but not going perhaps too far away from the science, but also recognizing that there's still more work to do and developments all the time that are being, and that is the nature of science. It's constantly shifting, obviously. So thanks for that. And obviously, we just literally come to the half-hour point of our discussion, and it's a good time to just switch, based on the idea that, of course, the good, steady plant-based diet with a wholesome, whole food, unprocessed, lots of good, beans, seeds, nuts, pulses, fruits, vegetables, and grains. That's the basis. Then, a good health, generally, good diet, good nutrition, and then some supplements. But what happens when this doesn't work and the body's, not well, and we are looking at, Western medicine and the ethics, and when we have maybe then a contradiction between our vegan position, especially our vegan position for the animals, where we are avoiding the use of animals wherever we can, and then we're perhaps compromised or conflicted or challenged by a situation where, we are really required to take medication, may well be tested on animals, may well include animal ingredients, may or may not be life-saving. It could be, maybe for yourself, or it may be for somebody one of your loved ones. It may be for perhaps, your companion animals. So what happens when we get to this, and it's a thorny one, and of course, with the vaccine issue right now, here we are at the end of 2020, it's been rolled out, there's some ethical issues, there's some safety issues, and there's some people concerned, there's just a lot of misinformation. We're not really going to look at vaccines so much, but more the broader picture, the broader vegan position, the medication position, perhaps some alternatives, where do we find medication that isn't tested on animals, that doesn't include animal ingredients? And we don't have that long to do it, so we may well open up more questions than we have answers. But that's a good thing. We want to be able to ensure really that people can talk about this in a safe way, constructive way, get good, reliable input in what is, as John Bird referred to in the big issue, sometimes can be the politics of contradiction. So if you do one, you create this. If you do this, you have that. And sometimes there isn't an easy answer to that. So on that note, Stephen, I think what would be really valuable is if you would like to, I know you've got some slides lined up, and it gives the Vegan Society, what's interesting about this, it gives the Vegan Society position on medicines, some of the history and some interesting information. So perhaps we might want to have a look at that. Steve, do you want us to go straight into the slides here, Steve?
Yeah, I think go into the slides, but I should say I'm speaking as an individual rather than as a representative of the Vegan Society. In some cases, I'll directly quote from the Vegan Society, and that is the Vegan Society position. But beyond that, I'm speaking as an individual.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, Stephen. I recognise that. But I think what is interesting is you know the Vegan Society as thoroughly as anyone, and you know the history, and you're able to point people, I think, to the Vegan Society position, because I think this is something that a lot of people look to and trust, but don't always understand, don't always, know. So, but indeed, yes, this is your own opinions, based on your own experience, not representing the Vegan Society in that capacity.
Okay, so we'll go to the slides. Okay, so the first starting point is, what is veganism? The Vegan Society is seeking an end to all exploitation of and cruelty to animals by humans. Very broad objective, but right from the outset, and still today, there's been a recognition that individual vegans in a non-vegan world will run into serious issues of practicality when they're trying to exclude all forms of exploitation. And that really informs the Society's definition of veganism. And that definition is, the word veganism denotes a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practicable, and that's the phrase we'll come back to, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. And by extension, veganism promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of humans, animals, and the environment. In dietary terms, veganism denotes the practice of dispensing of all products derived wholly or partly from animals. So that's the not universally accepted definition. Different people define veganism in slightly different ways, but I think it's probably one of the most widely accepted definitions. And it comes from a number of iterations by the Vegan Society over decades, and that's been the definition since word for word since the 1980s. Next slide, please. Okay, so we come to practicality. Is it actually possible for individual vegans to exclude all exploitation of non-human animals? The short answer would be no. Animal products turn up in vehicles, in motor cars, in electronic equipment, and in recent years even banknotes. And even tap water is not free from animal exploitation because it's tested for bacterial contamination, and that test for a long, long time has used animal products. So you could say, well, I could set up my own rainwater harvesting system and not use tap water. But for most people, that's beyond what is realistically possible and practicable. There's also a trade-off to think about between withdrawing from normal society in order to avoid benefiting from animal exploitation and engaging with and influencing that society to create a future normal without such exploitation. And I think we need to recognise that the greatest individual exclusion of animal exploitation may not overall result in the greatest benefit to animals. So we've quite a bit to juggle as vegans in a non-vegan world. Perfection really isn't the vegan ideal, isn't an option until we convince others to join with us and pursue that ideal and get rid of all the animal products that are currently ubiquitous. Next slide, please. Just to touch on diet and health. This, I would say, is really the easiest bit for vegans, because unlike when the early vegans started and formed the vegan society and set out with the hope that what was morally right would prove to be physically right, we now have good evidence that vegan diets support excellent health. We've got studies in the USA and Europe which have followed vegans over decades. And what they found is that the longevity and health of vegans is comparable to that of regular meat eaters. And the table here, and this is the only table I'm going to present, so I'll take a moment with it to explain what it means. The table here shows the death rates of different diet groups relative to the death rate in regular meat eaters. And all the groups do at least as well as regular meat eaters. If the relative death rate is 1 or less, is 1, it means that if it's 1, it means they're doing as well as the regular meat eaters. If it's less than 1, it means they're doing better. And to give a bit of a feel for how to interpret the numbers, if you had a number of 0.8, that would imply that that group was living about 2 years longer than the regular meat eaters. And in terms of diet, there doesn't seem to be a significant conflict between personal health and avoiding exploitation, because we find that all the groups who are restricting meat, restricting animal products, do at least as well as the groups that are regularly eating meat, that are freely using animal products. And just to look at the table in a bit more detail, there was a pooled analysis done, taking studies in the USA, UK, and Germany. That was published in 1999, and took account of all the studies up to that time. And in that, we found all the groups who were restricting use of animal products were doing at least as well as the group who wasn't restricting animal products. The main updates to that pooled analysis were there was from the UK EPIC Oxford study. There was an update in 2016 from that study. And again, all the groups restricting animal products were doing at least as well as the group who wasn't. And there was from the US an update from the Adventist studies there, and again, the same result. The vegans were in the US Adventist study were doing significantly better than the regular meat eaters. In the UK studies, it was more of a score draw. I could talk for a long time about what factors might influence the detail of those results, but the key result is that in no case were vegans or any other group restricting animal products doing worse than the regular meat eaters, your general population, the group closest to the general population. So when it comes to diet, we don't have a conflict between health and avoiding exploitation. Next slide, please. Medicine is more complicated, and it's probably one of the most challenging barriers to avoiding exploitation of animals. Because depending on your individual circumstances, and I think it's important to recognise that different people can find themselves in very different situations. Medicines can make a huge difference to quality and duration of life. But testing on living non-human animals is ubiquitous in the regulation and usually the development of conventional medicine. And animal ingredients are also common. So vegans can find themselves with a difficult choice to make. And sometimes the choice is an individual one. If a vegan forgoes the potential benefits of medicine to themselves, that might only affect them. But in certain cases, vaccination being one of the clearest ones, the choice whether to use a medicine or not affects others as well, and that becomes ethically more complicated. It's important to note that the animal exploitation in the production of modern medicines isn't necessary to provide the benefit from the medicine. But in a non-vegan world, it's often impossible to disentangle the two, because regulators across the world will insist that conventional medicines are at least tested on animals, and they will often choose to package them up with animal ingredients because they see no reason not to. And coming to a direct quotation from the Vegan Society website, in the context of medicine, they say, "We do our best, bearing in mind that looking after our health and that of others enables us to be effective advocates for veganism." So the Vegan Society certainly will not in any way condemn a vegan for choosing to use medicines that have been tested on animals or even other animal ingredients. We feel it as a choice to depend on their circumstances is still consistent with pursuing the vegan ideal as far as is possible and practical. So we view in general with medicines being down to the individual conscience and considering all their circumstances, and what is right for one person may not be right for another person in different circumstances. So I think it's very important not to be dogmatic. And
oh, just slightly lost Stephen there for a second. I think he'll probably come back. If not, we will. Yeah. So, okay. Well, look, Stephen will come back, but that's okay. We'll just carry on the conversation later. I'm sure Stephen won't be more than a minute or two, but if that older is back already, is he? Yeah. Hello. Hello.
yeah, I think I'm back.
Yeah, you're back.
Slides,
We can see you.
slides haven't reappeared yet, as far as I can see. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, we can see the slides. We can hear you. So if you want to carry on, Stephen, you're a bit blurred and that, but hello. Okay, slight little problem there. So okay, so I think we might just drop Stephen out and try and get a better connection there. Yeah, so Leila, look, we'll just chat about that because obviously there's a lot of stuff raised there, but I think the important thing there is that the position of the Vegan Society recognises that whereas medicines are not necessarily vegan, some vegans will be required to use those medicines, and that's understood whilst we live in a world where we may struggle to find that. So I think we've got Stephen back.
Yeah, I think so.
Test, right? Hello?
Yeah, is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. All right. Well, look, as we're in the slides, so Leila, if you just hold that point there, we'll finish off what's because you got. Have we got one or two more slides here?
Yeah, there's a few more slides.
Okay.
So if you go to the next slide, please.
Hello. Yeah, that's it. Okay. So this is interesting.
So, very topical topic, COVID-19 and the vaccine. One of the interesting things about the recent pandemic is how clearly it's emerged that those people who are worst affected are disadvantaged or vulnerable groups. So you get elderly care home residents who took a terrible battering that the government figures understate. There were about 10,000 died who weren't certified as having died from COVID. People with disabilities have 5-10 times the risk of other people in the general population. People with existing illnesses can be at higher risk. Health and care workers who can't retreat from the front line have a much higher risk of getting infected. And people in deprived areas and some ethnic minorities show a higher risk of getting infected and dying. So it gives a particular perspective on it that this isn't a risk that's shared equally across the population. It's particularly these vulnerable groups. Now, if you had fewer serious cases as a result of vaccination, that in itself would reduce pressure on the health service. If vaccination also reduces transmission, this is likely to be the case, but hasn't been proven yet, there'll be an even greater benefit to people, particularly vulnerable groups. And in this situation, the minimum harm choice, the choice that causes least harm overall, even ignoring your own self-interest, could be for vegans to take a vaccine despite the fact that it's been tested on animals. And what the Vegan Society has said in relation to the COVID-19 vaccine specifically is that the Vegan Society encourages vegans to look after their health and that of others in order to continue to be effective advocates for veganism and other animals. Much the same as I said in the general medical context, but I think there's a particular context for COVID-19 vaccine in that the people at risk are particular groups. It's not a risk that is evenly shared between all individuals, and that needs to be considered. Next slide, please. Some of the things that vegans might like to consider, or different vegans will look at. For some, the key consideration will be to not benefit personally from a product for which the development entailed the deliberate exploitation of non-human animals. And for the people who choose to take this position, something to consider is that sustained rigorous social distancing to a certain extent provides an alternative to vaccination until the virus is suppressed. So if you want to avoid the animal experimentation and avoid creating a risk to other people, then one option for you is to observe rigorous social distancing yourself. That obviously has a cost, and a personal strain won't work for everybody because of different commitments, but it's an option to consider. For others, the key consideration will be to protect the health of humans vulnerable to COVID-19, particularly those less able to protect themselves. And they may consider the testing on animals to get the vaccine approved as in the past and can't be undone. So actually taking the vaccine will not necessarily increase future harm to non-human animals. And some vegans will put a lot of emphasis on the potential negative publicity for veganism if vegans are perceived to be endangering public health. So there's a lot of different factors that different vegans might consider and come to different conclusions. And the Vegan Society isn't taking a judgment as to what the right conclusion is. It'd be very arrogant to do so. But what they have said is it is the responsibility of each individual to make an informed decision about vaccines, bearing in mind the definition of veganism, which, as I emphasized earlier, involves this element of recognizing that perfection isn't an option in a non-vegan world. And we're looking to pursue the ideal as far as possible and practical. Next slide. I just wanted to finish with a word from a early animal rights vegan, which I think illustrates how consistent this perspective has been throughout the Vegan Society's history. This is a quote from the Vegan Society's magazine, The Vegan, in spring 1951, by one of the early leaders who's regarded as the most strongly animal rights of the early vegan leaders. And he was talking about the rules for membership of the society and said, The new rules define a member as one who undertakes to live out vegan principles as far as he or she is able, according to circumstances. In other words, what is required is one's honest best, and honest in this context means reasonable also. No one should deny themselves the benefits of full membership simply because circumstances preclude as great a degree of consistency as might otherwise be desired. The great thing is to be vegan in spirit and then to do one's best. I think that is the outlook with which we should all approach this and other challenges, accepting that a zero harm choice isn't open to us, and that different people will legitimately make different choices. So I'll finish at the end of the slides. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. That's really interesting. And you know what? I'm really glad I asked you, because I knew you would just have that up your sleeve, and that was really elegant, I think, and constructive. Leila, what did you see there? That's the Vegan Society position, and some of the considerable factors, the CAF, which is such an important principle for making informed decisions, is to consider all factors before you make your decision. What did you make of that?
Well, I agree with Stephen. I mean, something he said, and we all need to just remind ourselves over and over. You know, on social media, usually we have a vegan kind of audience, and we keep forgetting that actually we live in a non-vegan world. So we are making the best of the situation. So unfortunately, like, you know, when it comes to any drug, really, any not just vaccines, it is the regulation, it is the law that it has to be tested on animals. So we need to do something about it, but we need to do something about the regulation. We need to do something to change that by saying that, you know, I'm not taking the drug when I really need to have it. It doesn't make us a non-vegan. And I think, you know, we really just need to remind ourselves that, you know, we live actually in a non-vegan world, and we're just making the best of it. And for me also, veganism is about compassion, not just compassion towards animals, but also compassion towards other humans. And, you know, you mentioned that, you know, the health inequalities, which we actually, you know, so quite to a large extent now during COVID-19, that, you know, some populations, some communities have been affected more. So obviously, it is, we can't just say, you know, go vegan and do this and you should do that. We need to show compassion to them and their situation and understand it and come up with solutions to their situation. So I think it is actually a challenge. It's definitely a challenge, but it is on us. So because we are, as I said, I think, you know, the public needs more education around, you know, nutrition and just in general about a lot of things. And unfortunately, we don't get it from the news. So that's not something, you know, we can just watch the news and get. So I think, yes, so it is just going back to the fact that it's not a vegan world and we are making the best of the situation. And, you know, the quote from the Vegan Society, I see that quite a lot actually posted on, you know, on social media, because we need to remind ourselves that is what veganism is about. That is actually the definition of veganism. So, yeah.
Yeah. So particularly in note of the fact that in COVID, you know, there is a disparity in the way this affects people. Once again, it's marginalised groups that seem to, you know, be hit hardest and bear the brunt. And therefore, you know, it is an important one to consider about medication, specifically about vaccines, about how, you know, I know it's very tempting to sort of think, oh, you know, let's just sit back and wait for everyone else to take it and then see, you know, not sure if it's safe or something, etc. These are all valid concerns, of course, but there is an ableist position here that we have to be clear that we've got to be, you know, supportive and understanding and look a bit deeper than just taking a singular position and not considering. So there's definitely an ableist factor to consider, but there's also a speciesist factor to consider. And although, Stephen, there is as you mentioned, there's a point to it. Well, okay, this is in the past, and there's nothing you can do about it. And the animal testing's been done. Obviously, unfortunately, as we know, this is just ongoing. I think it's, for instance, a misconception. People go, "Oh, the vaccines," of which I think there's something like 200 or something being developed for COVID-19. They've gone straight to human trials. So, they haven't done all the animal testing. It's like, well, I think that's a misunderstanding. I think the animal testing is going on side by side with the human trials. And it's not just a case of animal testing and not just a case of considering the rights of those animals not to be used in this process, but also the ingredients and what's going into, specifically again, vaccines, also other medicines. So there's two ethical considerations. There are solutions to that, though, aren't there, Stephen?
I think with the Pfizer vaccine, the one that's currently approved, as far as I could see, it doesn't have any animal ingredients. And the manufacturer is in vitro, not even using cell lines. So we haven't had the Vegan Society trademark team looking at it, because obviously we never would trademark something that's been animal tested. But from what I looked at from a quick look, it appeared that the issue was, with that particular vaccine at least, did seem to be just the testing rather than ingredients. And that does make a bit of a difference, but whichever way you're in the situation of be a non-vegan world offering non-ideal choices, I think there is this, on the one hand, even if the testing's in the past, not wanting to see the company that's done it make a profit out of it. It's not an idea. There is no ideal choice, and there is no single correct choice for that reason. Different people will take a different balance. Different people will be in different circumstances. Some people, for example, couldn't say, "I'll just isolate myself as an alternative to being vaccinated," because they might have a commitment to care for someone else, or they might require care themselves. There are all sorts of different circumstances, and I think we need to have a lot of sympathy and compassion for each other and for everyone affected by the current pandemic, and by also the animals who are so routinely abused in this world. So there is no perfect solution, and non-judgmental compassion is probably the best principle, and try to consider all our own circumstances and accept that other people may have different circumstances.
I think that is a very good point what Stephen just said, that we really need to be compassionate towards each other and non-judgmental. If another vegan decides not to have it or have it, whatever decision they make, we need actually to be understanding, because we might not know what else is going on in their life. They might actually, I don't know, I mean, we'll see how it goes, but they might need to have it for their job or for whatever other reason. So we really need to be non-judgmental, understanding, and compassionate towards each other.
I absolutely echo that, but also that we also want to talk about these things. We want to have spaces where people can discuss this. They can, because that's how we make up these decisions, and they're big decisions. And it is important to be kind and understanding, because these are not easy decisions sometimes for people, and it tends to be a lot easier to make these decisions when everything's fine than when it's not. And when you're confronted by, especially health issues, then suddenly it's not so cut and dried as, and if it is still, then that requires a big sacrifice. So if your position is that justice for animals comes first and foremost, and you are faced with these situations, including life-threatening diseases, you have to make decisions that involve sacrificing your own health for the principle of justice, and that should be respected and acknowledged. But at the same time, that's not necessarily a position that is going to be shared. I don't think anybody should expect that to necessarily be the default position. The vegan society position is really, I would say, the default position, and that's why it's so valuable to have this discussion, because, you know, again, that's how it's evolved. And to bring in Leslie Cross there, Stephen, who that quote is from now, you know, 69 years ago, so 70 years ago. It's not a new, it's not, you know, this isn't the first time round. We've been looking at this for a long time. And I absolutely wholeheartedly agree that a kind, supportive and informed approach is the best way through. And then whatever decisions you make, to try and be supportive and understanding that it's you know, there are compromises, there are conflicts, there are contradictions, and we need to recognise that and be supportive for each other with that. At the same time, we don't want to lose sight of what we're trying to do, which is establish a right for animals, or acknowledge that right for animals. So it is established throughout our broader society that animals have a right not to be used in the first place. And that if we can seek non-animal testing solutions and non-animal ingredient medications, that would be a real big step forward. And that's obviously where I'd like to just perhaps wrap up on that, except to ask you both to have a final word, as it were, and say. But yeah, it's been really valuable. I think there's obviously people who will be listening who will be concerned about these issues. I hope it's been of value. And again, I just refer you to the Vegan Society. It's got some great stuff. The Plant-Based Health Professionals website has got some great stuff. These are two really good resources. So, Stephen, you know, before we go,
I think the last word would be, one of the things that the Vegan Society and other vegan organisations try to do is to promote the development of alternatives to gradually, over time, remove the difficult choices. Because a lot of the difficult choices are completely unnecessary. They're avoidable with the appropriate motivation and effort. The work of organisations like Animal Free Research in this area is very much to be commended. There are lots of excellent organisations trying to move things along so that people can see there are better alternatives that will make it easier for vegans to come closer to the vegan ideal, and will reduce, more importantly, will reduce suffering of animals.
Leila.
Well, I really believe that, you know, and I think Stephen actually touched on that in his slide presentation, is looking after our own health is part of our activism. I have met 3 ex-vegans who were actually activists, but by compromising their health, they turned into ex-vegans. So we don't want that. So really, you know, we need to actually look after our health as well. That is part of taking care of the animals.
That's a really valid point. So, Leila, Stephen, thank you ever so much for joining us. There may well be some questions. You know what? I'm just going to have a quick look to see if there's it's a bit of a conversation there. It's a little bit, you know, might be worth a look later. But well, it would be worth a look later. But you might want to have a look later, as I certainly will. But just to end up, so look, if you are affected by this, of course, you know, we're all affected by it, but particularly those that are struggling right now, you know, our sympathies, our empathy, our support. We want to see kind, supportive discourse. Try and make sure we make the decisions that we will have to live with, and they've all got an impact. So on that note, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for listening, and good evening.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.